Frank, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm excited to be talking about a new record, and I'm excited to be in Amsterdam. This sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it's like, some people are like, oh, isn't doing press tiring? It's like, it's better than people not wanting to talk to me. Do you know what I mean? So I'm happy to be here.
Well, let's go back to the time when nobody kind of knew about you yet.
When no one wanted to talk to me, yeah.
Yeah, but because, well, this is kind of a reference to one of your songs, Show People, but when did you realize about yourself that you were a show person, that you...
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think, so specifically the song Show People is about all of the culture around music. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so for example, yesterday I was in a queue for immigration at an airport, and the guy in front of me in the queue was 1000% a tall person, and I could tell because of the jeans he was wearing, the type of bag he had, the type of headphones he had, you know, and it was just like, there is this sort of weird culture of people wearing black jeans and carabiners, you know, who know where the good food is at Chicago O'Hare Airport or whatever it might be. And that's a thing that I feel like I've earned through a lot of years on the road. But in terms of like, I mean, I wanted to be a musician from the minute I fell in love with music, which was when I heard Iron Maiden when I was 10 years old. And I guess, you know, it's not unusual to tell a story about a kid saying, I heard this band and they made me fall in love with music. But like, there was no gap between me falling in love with music and then immediately saying, I want to do this. Like, how do I be part of this? And that's not to say that I knew that I would be good at playing guitar or singing or writing songs, but it was just like, within seconds it was like, I need a fucking guitar or a drum kit or whatever, because I want to be part of this. I didn't want to be a passive consumer, I guess. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that, and I am often a passive consumer of music in the sense that I listen to records all fucking day. But like, right from the word go, it was like, I want to do this too. I want to, or at least try to do this too. I mean, in terms of the question, when did I know I was any good at it? I mean, I'll let you know when that happens. How about that?
Well, your latest or your previous album came in at #1. Now
That's true.
You've been close before, but and just as a quick side question, kind of, did that matter to you? Did that give you some validation? Or
it did. I mean, it wasn't a pure and simple feeling. And the reason for that is that when I was a teenager, almost my entire social self-definition was I was the kind of person who didn't give a fuck about the charts. You know what I mean? I didn't know what was in the charts. I didn't like what was in the charts because I was an underground punk rock kid. And there's a huge part of my identity that remains somebody who is a denizen of alternative culture. That's what the song No Thank You for the Music is about, really, is taking pride in that. At the same time, holy shit, we've got a #1. That's amazing, you know? And it certainly made my mum look up, you know what I mean? And we had come very close, as you know, a number of times. And this time around, we were hoping to get it again. Now fucking Taylor Swift's putting out a record the week before me. So that's the end of that.
chance.
No chance. And I really like Taylor Swift, and I think that people who hate on Taylor Swift don't know what they're talking about. That's a different conversation.
I'm a big American football fan. I love her.
Okay, there we go.
She's bringing new people to the
Yeah,
sport.
totally. I think she's just clearly a really good songwriter and a really good role model. So good for her. I'd rather her be at the top of the tree than pretty much anybody else, apart from me. I'm kidding. But no, I mean, you know, I am proud of it, and it was cool. And it did also, like, open some doors and stuff for me, which was interesting. And, you know, it's just nice to just be able to tell people. Yeah, and it's not the first thing I tell people when I meet them, but you just drop it in conversation. Oh yeah, I also got a #1 record. That's cool.
But I find it very interesting, and there are some songs about this, as you mentioned, this identity as you were growing up, and then marrying that to the identity you have now as a 40-something year old.
Yeah, I mean, well, so the thing about that is that, like, there was this has happened a few times in my career. There was a moment in time when this album might have been a concept album. It's not a concept album, and I think everyone is relieved. But like, the idea that was kind of haunting me is that essentially I do this thing, and this is 100% true. I have these arguments in my mind when I'm going to sleep, and it's not healthy. It's an unhealthy thing to do. And I realized a few years ago that the person I'm arguing with is my 15-year-old self. And 15-year-old me, like all 15-year-olds, was very sure, very idealistic, very angry, pretty hurt, actually. I mean, I talked about this in FTAC. It was
Sure.
I had a pretty unpleasant. I had some very difficult moments in my childhood. I felt very alienated and very rejected and all this sort of thing. But like, you know, my view of ethics and punk rock and all that kind of thing was very simple and pure and black and white and everything. And life is not black and white. Life is grey, and you hit your 40s and you understand. I think you should have understood by now that like life is more complicated than you think it is when you're a teenager. But nevertheless, I feel like that kid's kind of angry with me in a way, and that's weird and that's not healthy. And there was a moment when the record was going to be a kind of just a broad conversation. The survival of that is the song Ceasefire,
Right.
which I think is one of the more important songs on the record to me. I mean, they're all important to me, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
But also like Girl from the Record Shop kind of comes from that period of writing as well, in the sense that that's kind of a memory of being 15 and going to a record store for the first time and not feeling cool. and not feeling cool enough to talk to the cute girl behind the counter, but also just sort of generally being overwhelmed by the whole experience and falling in love not just with her, but with record shops generally and record culture and vinyl culture. So, but yeah, so there's definitely like, I spend a lot of time thinking about that, about how I measure up to those kind of ideals and stuff. And in some ways that's good and that's useful. It's not ideals aren't a bad thing.
Sure.
But it's more just that you understand that, like, you know, failing to live up to an ideal doesn't mean you should necessarily reject that ideal. It's perhaps you should be a little more forgiving with yourself and a little more understanding of the world as it really is.
Yeah, because I think there is potential to put a lot of pressure on yourself if you don't.
Oh, yeah.
And if I wrote a line on, I'm not everything you think you hoped and imagined you would be. Now,
Right.
you are a successful musician,
Yeah,
I would
sure.
say. So what's the picture of yourself when you?
Oh well, I'm not Ian MacKaye. That's the problem.
Okay.
And the thing about that, I mean, I say that and I'm kind of joking, but weirdly enough, I kind of know Ian MacKaye a little bit these days, and he's a lovely and very reasonable and measured dude, and he's also. Ian MacKaye isn't the Ian MacKaye that I imagined when I was 15
Sure.
either, and nor should he be. But it's like, yeah, you know, there are just sort of like, I mean, I did some records with the major label. I got a #1 record, all this kind of thing. And in some ways that's cool, and in some ways that's things that would have made me angry when I was a kid.
But in that sense, then, was it important for you to go back to being kind of that independent guy then for this album?
Yes, I'm excited about it. I'm not like saying that I regret any of my decisions, but I'm proud of the fact that when I did a license deal with a major label in 2013, and like it was kind of an experiment. It wasn't a joke, but it was just kind of like, this is kind of ridiculous, and this is going to last for one album, and that's fine. And then it lasted for 5 records, and I finished my deal, and I'm quite proud of that fact. But I mean, you know, at this point, album 10, 42, all that kind of stuff, like I'm ready. I'm very happy to be back in the independent world again. It feels comfortable to me.
But let me ask it a little bit differently. What is your, it maybe sounds a little bit too contrived, but what is your aim with your music then?
Wow, that's the biggest question I've been asked in a while. What's my aim with my music? I mean, in some ways it's very pure. Like I'm trying to write the best music I can and trying to do it in the best way I can, and then try and present that in the best way that I can. Obviously, you know, I am ambitious on some levels. I want to play to lots of people. That's one of the things that 15-year-old me is pissed off about, because 15-year-old me refuses to accept that art is a form of communication. You know, there's that kind of broken equation in punk rock somewhere that success means compromise. And it doesn't necessarily. I think it's kind of a cool instinct in the punk scene to be suspicious of the people who are interested in fame over and above art. But I mean, I can confidently say now that that's not true of me. I'm not really interested in being famous for the sake of it. I don't. What the fuck is the point in that? So I am ambitious, but like I try and maintain a purity in my writing. Like when I write a song, it's like nothing else matters. I don't mean the Metallica song. Like, you know, I don't care what anybody else thinks about it. Like my audience for my music, first and foremost, is my own judgment. You know, and I mean, one of the reflections of that is that, like, if I drew up a list of what my best songs are, I mean, it would change every day. But if I drew up a list of what my best songs are, it bears no relation to my Spotify top 10.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And there were times in my life when I found that troubling, and now I just understand it doesn't matter, and everyone's judgment is different. But like I think there's a song called "Broken Piano" on Tape Deck Heart, which I think is probably the best song I ever wrote, and no one agrees with that statement.
Very quickly then, why do you think that is? Why do you think that song is the best one you wrote?
Oh well, I mean, I was being first of all, maybe not best song, but certainly one of the most sort of complex pieces of art that I've put into the world. And I mean, why? Why do I think that? Because I think, first of all, because it's a reworking of a traditional English folk melody in a post-rock format that was based on a drone piece that came to me because my old girlfriend's microwave was broken and used to hum in a perfect A6 chord. And an A6 is an ambiguous chord. If you sing a third in it, you get a minor chord. If you sing a fourth in it, you get a fourth chord. If you sing a fifth in it, you get a clash. So there's all of that kind of shit. And it's also got one of my favorite lyrics I ever wrote, and "A sinner amongst saved men on the banks of the muddy Thames," which is a reference to both John Milton and Nirvana. That's cool. There's all of this kind of stuff. But also, I mean, on some levels, I just like it. There is a part of me that thinks that ultimately appreciation of music doesn't get more complicated than that. You know what I mean?
But the reason I ask is kind of, for instance, if we take this album, what for you is the bar when you start writing these songs? Because how do you have to kind of, which boxes do you have to check for yourself?
This is a really good question. I mean, to answer a slightly different question for a second,
sure,
coming back around.
No
Sometimes a lot of people ask you like, how do you do songwriting and all the rest of it? And depressingly, on some levels, the answer is you think of what a cool song would go like, and then you do that. You know what I mean? And it's like, that sounds really sort of janky, but it's kind of true. I mean, I guess whenever any given song, there's a moment when it's just an itch in your brain, and there is this sort of, I can sort of feel what it would feel like to listen to the finished song. And then quite a long time later, you listen to the finished song, and the bar is kind of like, does it match up to how I thought it would sound like? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And there are moments during the process, it's not just a question of thinking about it before you start writing and then listen to the finished recording. There are moments when you check in on that idea, and sometimes you go, this is not what I wanted it to be. Let's rewrite it, kind of thing. And sometimes that's about arrangement, and sometimes it's about writing, and sometimes it's about lyrics. I mean, the song "Somewhere in Between," which is one of, again, quite an important song for me on the record, there are about, I mean, without exaggerating, I think there's about 12 different arrangements of that song on my hard drive. At one point, it was just piano and vocals. At one point, it was a kind of almost like a noise song. It was just kind of like droning feedback and kind of whispered lyrics and stuff. Then it was like a punk song, and do you know what I mean? And it was just like, it took me time to get that one, and I think we got it right, but ask me again in 5 years and I'll tell you I got it wrong, and then we'll put out the acoustic version or whatever. So there's lots of checking in on that, but I guess the bar is like, does it match up to what I'd hoped the song could be when I was first imagining that song existing?
Because am I right in saying that this album you recorded and did everything in kind of your home studio? So did that change the process of writing? Because I can imagine you can at any moment just think, oh, I have an idea, I can go to...
Yes, although what I would say is that actually the recording part of this album was pretty simple. And the reason for that is that we did a lot of demoing. And like, I guess there are records that I've made, and there are some artists that work like this every time, where you experiment in the studio, and the studio is a tool, and you don't really know what it's going to be like when you start recording. And that, like, the big album for me for that was Be More Kind. Like, the whole point of that record was that, like, we were going to experiment in the studio, which we did. With this one, it was like I demoed it solo, we demoed it full band, we demoed it full band again, and with me producing, to a degree, it was just kind of like getting the parts down. Do you know what I mean? It was just like, I fucking know how, and that's kind of why I felt comfortable producing it myself. That's not always true for me. It may not always be true for me in the future. There's part of me that thinks it'd be amazing to work with someone like T-Bone Burnett or Nigel Godrich or whoever and make a more experimental record. This isn't a musically experimental record for me. It was like, I know how these songs go, let's fucking record them.
But that, I think an important element, and this kind of goes into the theme of Undefeated as well, is the fact that you're still here and you have something to say. So,
Yeah.
so what is it? I don't know if this is a good question, but what is that fire in you that you feel like there's something you need to?
I don't know is the answer to your question, and I'm wary of examining it too much because I don't want to kill it. You know what I mean? But like, you know, yeah, one of the central themes of the record is the fact that I'm still here at 10 albums in, and like you can look at my career and you can see the underground bit, and you can see the kind of the lift up bit, and you can see the big holy shit songs all over the radio bit. Then you can see the experimental kind of walkabout records where everybody's shouting at me, which I'm proud of, and I think it's a necessary part of a 10 album career. Jesus Christ, there's got to be some bits where you try something else. But but I mean, there's a sense of like pride in still being here, but there's also, I hope and I think, a sense of kind of pleasant surprise. It's just kind of like, fucking hell, like it's still working. You know, and it's funny because like I haven't written a lick of music since I finished this album.
Okay.
Which is kind of unusual for me, actually. But I mean, I'm not worried about it because I think that it's a good record and I'm proud of it, and I haven't shared the whole thing with the world yet, and I'm excited to do that.
Sure.
But yeah, you know, there is definitely a sense that like it just seems, taking a longer view, like I wasn't sure I was going to get to make a second record. You know what I mean? And even going further back than that, like when I first got into music, my parents kind of banned me from buying records and buying music magazines. In fairness, that's because the first music magazine I ever bought had Cannibal Corpse on the front cover, and I was 10, and my mum was just like, nope. But like, you know, my parents were against it, my teachers and all my schooling was against it, all my friends thought it was a joke that I wanted to be a musician when I was a kid. And even then, you know, I was in a band that sort of did okay for 2 records and then broke up, and everyone was like, that's that done. You know what I mean? And like, the fact that I have maintained this over a long period of time, and touch wood, it looks like I can probably keep doing this for a while yet. It's just, in the long view, it's kind of unlikely. And I did it on my own terms, and I did it, you know, there's a fair amount of stubbornness.
Well, I was going to say, what do you attribute that to, the fact that you're still here?
I mean, again, like in terms of the fact that self-evidently the music I make has an appeal to some people, that's a thing I'm not going to dive into because it's not really for me to talk about. Yeah, I'm very grateful for it, Jesus Christ, but like, you know, I don't want to spend too long. I think I would disappear up my own ass if I spent too long talking about that, you know what I mean? But in terms of the other sides of things, I mean, stubbornness is definitely part of it. I mean, I have, for some reason, I seem to have a work ethic, which has worked for me. You know, I have done a lot of touring, famously, and all the rest. So definitely kind of like a refusal to fuck off has been useful for me.
No, but I mean, there has been a steady decline, incline as well, or a steady growth. So, and I think the magic also is that there is a communal factor in your music, if that makes sense.
I mean, thank you. And the thing, yeah, you know, and like I'm really pleased about that. So I have my own little festival called Lost Evenings that we do every year, and I think it was at the second one. It was and it was at the Roundhouse in London. And the thing about the Roundhouse, there's a little window where you can look down on the doors and where everyone comes in, and you can't be seen, which sounds creepy, but bear with me. And I was kind of watching the doors open on day one, and lots of people come in with one of my oldest friends, who's known me since my days in the hardcore scene. And he looked at me and he went, "Oh, I see what you're doing, you fucker." And I was like, "What am I doing?" And he said, basically what he said was that like everybody, I had this idealized version of what hardcore punk scenes were supposed to be like. And then I found the hardcore punk scene in London, and then it wasn't quite like that in the end because real life is complicated, and there were kind of scene disputes and egos and all of this sort of shit. And he was like, "You're just trying to recreate your idealized version of what you thought a punk scene was like." And I was like, yeah, fuck yeah. I mean, why not? Do you know what I mean? And like, so the fact that particularly at Lost Evenings, but like hopefully at most of my shows, there is a sense of community around it is something I'm really grateful for and proud of, I would say. And like one of the things, I remember I was doing a show with Katie Tunstall, you know?
Sure,
Yeah,
yeah.
who's awesome,
Yeah.
wonderful person. And she sort of said to me that she was like, you sort of talk to the crowd about being considerate to each other. She was like, I don't think I've ever seen someone do that before. And I was like, I mean, I remember it from a kid, you know, straight edge bands, justice for animals, look out for each other, all that shit. But it's also, a few years into my touring career, it occurred to me that if you're standing on the stage and you had a microphone and everyone's paying attention, I wouldn't use the word responsibility, I would use the word opportunity. You have an opportunity to talk to people about how they engage with each other. And one of the things I learned from punk rock as a kid was that, like, you know, hardcore scenes are generally pretty insular, they're pretty small, they're often pretty fucking middle class, let's be honest with each other.
Sure.
But like, they're kind of a cool training ground for real life. And I'm really grateful that I grew up going to those kinds of shows. And they would, you know, we'd talk about animal rights, women's rights, anarchism, all this kind of stuff.
Sure.
And it wasn't like, I don't think any of us thought, well, hold on. Some of us thought we were changing the world there and then, we weren't. But I learned lots about my own ethics and stuff in that, and you take it outside of that. And that's a thing that sort of, I think is kind of in my DNA. So like just sort of saying to people on stage, like, don't be a dickhead, treat each other well, pick people up if they fall down, all that kind of thing. It's really simple and obvious to me. But over the years, I can never go to my own shows, obviously, right? Do you know what I mean? But
Sure.
like, I do think about the fact, apparently Jarvis Cocker used to walk around pulp shows in a giant rabbit suit.
Okay.
Just so he could see what it was like, which I think is kind of awesome. Anyway, I can never go to my own shows, but like I do have lots of people say that there is a more kind of like welcoming atmosphere at my shows than some others, and I'm proud of that fact.
No, I think you should be. Is there the kind of to round off? Is there one story that somebody who listened to your music told you that kind of always stuck with you?
I mean, there's lots. I mean, my email address is public, so and still is. So I get it, and I get a lot of email, and that's incidentally a thing I picked up off Henry Rollins. You know, you can email Henry Rollins. You can email me. I've got Henry Rollins playing Lost Evenings.
I was going to say, aren't you? Isn't he playing with you one of these days?
He's doing Lost Evenings in Toronto this year, and I am fucking stoked and nervous.
Because he's within that world that you kind of came up with. He's a legend still, I suppose.
Yeah, he's the wise old elder. I think I'm like the fact that he now. I've met him once, but I don't. It was like an introduction, and it was like he now definitely knows who I am as a musical entity, and that makes me a little bit nervous because it's like it's fucking Henry Rollins. But I mean, in terms of stories and stuff, I mean, you know, a lot of people have talked to me about that kind of thing. There's a thing which I think is amazing. There's a thing in the UK, I think it's just in the UK, it might be elsewhere. Anyway, it's called the Solo Armada. And the thing about the Solo Armada was at one of the Lost Evenings, they put together this system of badges whereby if you come to the gig on your own and you didn't know anyone, but you were up for a conversation and making new friends, you just wear one of these badges. And now there's people, they meet up all over the world and stuff, and at shows, and lots of other bands. Well, the Solo Armada now, it was originally just at my festival, now it's any gigs kind of thing. You wear one of these little badges, and it just means I'm here on my own, but hey, if you want to say hi, I'm game for that. And I just think that's amazing. I will say the Solo Armada last year had their first kind of awards thing that they did, and I didn't fucking win one, and I'm pissed off about it. No, I'm kidding. But I think that's really cool. But I mean, you know, as a fan of music myself, and I do this a lot, I try and think about a lot of what I do from the perspective of a fan, you know. So for example, people having tattoos in my lyrics, and when I first heard about that, I got really kind of weird about it. And then I remembered that I have shitloads of lyric tattoos of my own, and it's like, oh, okay, now I understand that. It's still a bit weird for me because I don't think of myself in the same headspace as the people whose words I have tattooed on me, but I understand the impulse, you know what I mean? And then, but you know, I mean, a few years ago, we were playing somewhere in the Midwest in America, and I wasn't having the best day. Not for any good reason, I was just tired on tour. And we played an old song, and there was a guy in the audience who was demographically... It's a song called I Need Proof Before I Got Famous, which is about living above a bar and being 25 and taking too many drugs and sort of feeling invincible. And there was this guy who was like, I want to say in his early 60s, and he wasn't quite wearing a suit, but like he was smartly dressed and he had glasses, and he was on his own, and he sung along with every fucking word of that song with his eyes closed and with tears streaming down his cheeks and his fists clenched. And I just thought to myself, okay, this is worth doing. I mean, not that I spend much time worrying about that, but it was like, it was so, and I didn't talk to him after the show or anything. I have no idea who this guy was. But it was just so powerful to see him do that, partly because of the sort of, the demographic kind of tells about the guy, which may be completely unfair, but also because I have done that so many times. Do you know what I mean? I go to a Hold Steady show and I scream every fucking word back at Craig. Do you know what I mean? And like, and to see somebody do that for me, it's still unusual for me. It's still something that feels wild. Like, holy shit. I wrote that song in a fucking squat like nearly 20 years ago. Look at this guy. Like, how fucking cool is that?
I mean, that just shows you the power of music.
Right, totally. I just, my reticence is putting myself on that part of it, but like, god damn, I know how that feels.
Frank, may I thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you,
the
that
time.
was really fun. Those are
Thank
some
you.
searching questions, man.